Jeff Goldblum has been telling the same story for 33 years. It's always about Sam Neill, always about the laughs between takes on that island, always about the friendship that formed before anyone knew whether Jurassic Park would amount to anything at all. He's telling it again this week. But this time, that story carries something it never used to, because sitting underneath all that warmth and nostalgia is a boy who spent nearly 14 years of his childhood too frightened to open his mouth. A wound so private that almost nobody on that dinosaur island had the faintest idea it was there. Sam was born on a kitchen table in Omagh, County Tyrone, Northern Ireland, on the 14th of September, 1947. Nigel John Dermot Neill, son of an English mother and a New Zealand father serving with the Irish Guards. When Sam was 7, the family packed up and emigrated to Christchurch, and arriving there with a plum accent, and the name Nigel was, as he later put it, asking for trouble in a rough New Zealand playground. He picked up the nickname Sam to avoid confusion with a childhood friend who shared his name, and it stuck for life. What almost nobody outside his closest circles knew for years was how much that move had actually cost him. Sam developed a severe stutter as a small boy, one serious enough to swallow most of his childhood whole. "I spent most of my childhood hoping that people wouldn't talk to me so that I didn't have to talk back," he admitted decades later on Australian television. That silence stretched on for nearly 14 years. Relief came gradually, first through an outward-bound course, the kind of physically demanding program built around running logs and falling into rivers, and then through debate and drama at university, where studying English literature pulled him into a production of Macbeth. Something about performing as someone else loosened a voice that had stayed locked for over a decade. It was at Victoria University of Wellington, inside that same drama circle, that Sam met a fellow student named John Clark. Clark was a fast-talking young New Zealander who'd go on to become one of Australasia's most beloved satirists. Nobody in that theater group could have seen it coming, but the friendship those two built in the late 1960s would outlast nearly every professional relationship either man formed afterward. They finally shared a screen together in the 1990 comedy Death in Brunswick, and Sam described it as probably the happiest experience I've ever had on a film. That's a striking thing to say from someone who'd already stood opposite Meryl Streep and Sean Connery. His film career had been building for years by then, starting with an international breakthrough in Sleeping Dogs back in 1977, followed by a leading role in My Brilliant Career in 1979, and even a screen test for James Bond that Timothy Dalton ultimately won. Through every chapter of that climb, his parents stayed a warm and constant presence in his life. Even long after they'd both passed, Sam still spoke of them in interviews as though they were somehow still around, admitting openly that he adored them just as much. It was a grief he carried quietly, never quite letting it go. Then came the stretch of films that turned him into a genuine leading man: a submarine officer in The Hunt for Red October, a husband unraveling with suspicion in Dead Calm, opposite a then-teenage Nicole Kidman, and Holly Hunter's silent husband in The Piano. Kidman was just 18 when they filmed Dead Calm, and reflecting on him this week, she said Sam had taken her under his wing from the start, and they'd remained close friends ever since. It was on that same set, in 1989, that Sam first encountered makeup artist Noriko Watanabe. "I opened the door, and I thought, oh my God," he later admitted. They married that same year, and their daughter Elena was born in 1991, joining his son Tim, born in 1983, to actress Lisa Harrow. But there was another chapter before all of that, one Sam kept almost entirely to himself for over 20 years. In his early 20s, before any kind of stability or recognition had come his way, he'd fathered a son who was placed for adoption. He and that son didn't find each other again until 1994, a reunion Sam handled with the same quiet care he applied to most of his private life. It was a second chance at fatherhood that neither of them had been able to plan for. Sam opened his own memoir, with a memory of Elena as a small child, the moment a teacher asked her class what their parents did for a living. Her answer about her famous father, Sam wrote, was both sharp and completely on point. "My daddy sits in caravans," she said, referring to the trailers where actors spend so much of their working day just waiting. When Elena later developed a stutter herself, a speech therapist immediately asked whether either parent had ever struggled with one. Sam, who'd kept that part of his own story private for most of his life, found himself saying it out loud for the first time. "It's more or less an inherited condition," the therapist told him. This was news to him, even after a lifetime of living with it. He became one of the most openly candid public figures of his generation on the subject, doing so decades before that kind of honesty was normal or celebrated. Off the screen, Sam built a second life that meant every bit as much to him as acting ever did. In 1993, the same year Jurassic Park turned him into a household name, he founded Two Paddocks, a vineyard in central Otago, on land tied directly to his own family history. He counted his very first grapes that same year he was sprinting through a Hawaiian jungle, dodging fictional dinosaurs. For Spielberg, the wine clearly meant something personal. "My wine has many more dimensions than I could possibly aspire to have," he told one interviewer. On Australian television, promoting a Pinot Noir with a completely straight face, he simply described it as sex in a glass. The farm grew into its own unexpected source of fame as Sam started sharing videos of the animals living there, naming them after famous friends. A lamb for Meryl Streep, another for Michael Caine. That same unbothered confidence spilled into his politics too, which he never once tried to hide, despite decades of industry advice telling actors to keep quiet. In his later years, he became an outspoken opponent of a proposed gold mine near his own vineyards, a position that earned him a public rebuke from a sitting government minister. Sam didn't back down. Then came 2017, a year he later described as one of the hardest of his adult life. His marriage to Noriko quietly ended in separation after nearly 3 decades together. That same year, on April 9th, his oldest friend in the world, the same John Clark who'd shared a drama circle with him back in the 1960s, collapsed from a sudden heart attack while bushwalking in Australia. He was 68 years old, gone without any warning at all. Sam's response, posted within hours, remains one of the rawest things he ever put his name to. "My dear old friend John Clark has died," he wrote. "I cannot speak." A devastating sentence from a man who'd spent his entire public life talking openly about nearly everything, including the very speech impediment that phrase seems to quietly echo without ever naming it. Nearly 50 years of shared jokes and shared sets reduced to 5 words and a full stop. His career kept widening after that. A tormented wizard in Merlin, the menacing Major Chester Campbell in Peaky Blinders, Cardinal Wolsey in The Tudors. Then, in 2022, while promoting Jurassic World Dominion, Sam noticed swollen glands that doctors initially suspected were linked to undetected COVID. Further tests revealed stage 3 angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphoma, a rare and aggressive blood cancer. "I'm crook," he wrote, bluntly and without fuss. When he began working on what became his memoir, the diagnosis sharpened his focus fast. Possibly dying, he figured, meant he'd have to speed things up. He never bothered learning the precise medical name for his own cancer, preferring the description his friend Stephen Fry offered him instead, calling it simply the Whoreson Pisser. His first round of chemo didn't work. Doctors moved him onto an experimental drug under a strange deal, free treatment, if he was still breathing 4 months down the line. He was. By his 4th scan, they confirmed full remission. And Sam wrote with clear, audible relief, "I'm a living man with every intent of going on living and living." In one of his last big interviews with The Guardian, he put it simply, "I'm not afraid to die, but it would annoy me because I'd really like another decade or 2. I've got my lovely little grandchildren. I want to see them get big." And that brings us to the friendship that carried him through almost all of it. The one that began on a fake dinosaur island in 1993 and never really ended. Sam Neill and Jeff Goldblum first crossed paths on the original Jurassic Park, playing Dr. Alan Grant and Dr. Ian Malcolm side by side, and their bond nearly collapsed before it had the chance to form. In September 1992, while the production was still filming on the Hawaiian island of Kauai, Hurricane Iniki tore straight through their location. The storm was serious enough that Sam later said the whole cast and crew genuinely thought it might kill them. "We all became very close surviving Hurricane Iniki," Sam told The Hollywood Reporter years later, remembering 3 tense weeks on the island before nature tore their sets apart and forced everyone back to Los Angeles. Shared fear has a way of stripping away the usual distance between co-stars and fast. It left Sam and Jeff with something most working relationships never get to build: real trust earned under real pressure, long before either of them knew how enormous that finished film would become. It's the kind of story that never makes it into any franchise retrospective. 3 grown adults, genuinely frightened together in a hotel, while a Category 4 hurricane ripped apart the sets they'd spent months constructing, somehow coming out the other side closer for it. The friendship that followed was built as much on laughter as on that shared crisis. Sam has said for years that he finds Jeff immensely entertaining, someone who could turn even the dullest stretch of downtime into something worth remembering. That reputation got a proper test during the making of Jurassic World Dominion in 2020, when COVID protocols locked the returning cast inside strict quarantine, unable to leave their hotel or go anywhere near London for months at a time. Bryce Dallas Howard, who lived through the same quarantine bubble, later recalled spending 4.5 months in a hotel just minutes from set. Sam credited Jeff directly with making that stretch bearable. "It was a lot of fun to have someone who can get on the piano and have a bit of a sing-along, maybe a dance or two," Sam said, joking that between Jeff and the rest of their weary little group, they had no choice but to entertain themselves, since there was simply nowhere else to go. "What better way to pass the time," he added, "than with Jeff Goldblum and all those other idiots." Those piano sessions weren't just stories either. Video clips surfaced from inside that quarantine showing the two of them side by side at the keys, trading verses of the old standard, "I Remember You," a private joke between old friends that quietly became public proof of just how close they'd become. Sam's way of talking about Jeff carried a specific teasing warmth that only years of real friendship can produce. "Ian Malcolm brings out the worst in Alan Grant," he joked to one interviewer, explaining that his character stayed quietly jealous of how effortlessly cool Malcolm always appeared, swivel hips and all, while Grant remained just an old paleontologist who'd never once been accused of coolness in his life. Off-screen, the teasing ran the other direction just as easily. When Jeff's birthday came around one year, Sam posted a photo of himself next to a matching pair of Funko Pop figures. His own perfectly plain Alan Grant pose, sitting beside Jeff's far cheekier Ian Malcolm collectible, with the caption, "Happy birthday" to his cute mantelpiece avatar, and to Jeff's own more rated one. He even needled Jeff about their very different habits, pointing out that despite 30 years of friendship and 3 decades of Sam running his own vineyard, neither Jeff nor Laura Dern had ever really warmed to wine. They were smoothie people, cold-pressed juice people, disappointingly unbothered by everything 2 paddocks had to offer. It's a small, silly detail, but it captures something honest about the shape their friendship actually took over 3 decades. Not built on shared tastes or overlapping habits, but on the simple and durable fact that they made each other laugh consistently across a hurricane, a global pandemic, and every quiet stretch of ordinary life in between. That closeness meant Jeff was among the very first people Sam told when the cancer diagnosis came. He shared it with us early on. Jeff later confirmed publicly, adding that Sam stayed in constant contact throughout treatment, that he looked fantastic, that he sounded great, and that Jeff simply adored him. When Dominion finally put the three original stars back on screen together for the first time in nearly 30 years, Jeff described the whole experience with a warmth that went well beyond standard press tour enthusiasm. He compared it to a high school reunion he'd never actually attended but felt absolutely certain couldn't possibly measure up. "We had such an unforgettable, life-changing time," he said, reflecting on how the friendship that started on that very first film had reshaped him just as deeply as the movie ever did. Seeing Sam and Laura's faces light up again, after everything they'd all been through, decades apart, a hurricane, a pandemic, and now a cancer diagnosis quietly running in the background, felt almost too much to believe. Sam Neill passed away suddenly on the 13th of July, 2026, in Sydney, surrounded by his family. He was still cancer-free. The illness that had defined so much of his final chapter wasn't what took him in the end. Word got to Jeff within hours, and what he chose to share with the world wasn't a polished statement drafted by a publicist. It was something far more personal. He posted the video Bryce Dallas Howard had filmed months before. The three of them were huddled around a piano during that same COVID quarantine that had once pushed and ultimately strengthened their bond. Sam and Laura leaning in close, all three voices open and unguarded, singing the Beatles' Blackbird like there was no place on earth they'd rather be. Beneath it, Jeff wrote just one line: "The next great adventure begins. Love always and forever." A farewell built entirely from a memory, not a headline. That was exactly the kind of goodbye a man who preferred piano sing-alongs to grand speeches would choose to leave behind. And he didn't stop there. In the days that followed, Jeff spoke about Sam the same honest, unfiltered way he always had, without pretense, without the careful distance actors often put between themselves and a colleague's death. He called him a treasure, a mischief maker, a man impossible not to adore. The language was identical to how he'd described Sam while he was still very much alive, proof that nothing about Jeff's warmth for him was ever for the cameras. Laura Dern, who'd weathered that same hurricane and shared that same quarantine hotel with both of them, added her own tribute that week. She called Sam a true and noble gentleman, wrapped up in her dream leading man, and promised she'd love him forever as her Dr. Alan Grant. Steven Spielberg, the man who first brought all three of them to that island back in 1993, wrote that he adored making every Jurassic film with Sam. He remembered specifically how strange it always was watching someone so gentle, so devoted to his own children, convincingly play a man irritated by kids on screen. It was a small, telling contradiction, and it was exactly what made the performance sing, because it ran against everything Sam actually was. For an audience that had spent 30 years watching Alan Grant and Ian Malcolm bicker through dinosaur chaos, that final piano video offered something far more honest than anything the franchise ever scripted for them. Two old friends and the woman who'd lived through a hurricane, a global pandemic, and 30 years of time between them, all coming back together the only way they ever really knew how, through a song none of them had to practice. There were no producers pulling strings behind the scenes, no writers crafting the moment in some boardroom. It didn't need any of that. By then, Jeff, Sam, and Laura had spent 33 years showing the world that whatever spark Spielberg caught on camera had never once required a script to keep burning. From a storm tearing through Kauai to a lonely quarantine hotel room decades down the line, to one last gentle piano video shared quietly with the world, that friendship kept telling its own story entirely on its own schedule, right through to the final chapter. Nobody planned it. It just kept happening, because that's what real connection does. So here's the question we're leaving you with tonight. Which moment from Sam Neill's story, or which small, almost invisible detail from his life, is the one that's going to stick with you the longest? Drop it honestly in the comments below. Subscribe to stay updated on every story that matters, and we'll see you in the next one.